Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and we're continuing to look at Warhammer the Old World, but we're doing something a little bit different today, and that is we're going to be talking about some competitive play, and in particular the Nova Open, given there are some updated Old World essentially tournament rule set, particularly with regard to army composition and also the missions as well. So what is the Nova Open? Well, the Nova Open is a Washington, D.C. area tabletop gaming convention with a strong focus on organised play, charity, hobby seminars and social connection, as taken directly from their website. And in 2023, they had more than 3,200 gamers attending, and 2024 will be the 13th year of the Nova Open. So, pretty good for me, having just moved to Virginia in the US, is I'm going to be pretty close to this. The downside is I still don't have any of my models because they're still in transit across the Atlantic Ocean somewhere, but I'm hoping that by the time this takes place that we might actually have something. Anyway, without further ado, let's have a look and see what the tournament rules they're setting for this are. So, we've got Warhammer the Old World there. Yeah, it's August 31st, September the 1st. So, yeah, another square-based grand tournament. So, they're using the Warhammer the Old World rule set for the event. There we go, nice. And there's your day 1 and 2. Great. Okay, so, let's have a look. There has been lots of talk about list composition and restrictions, so thank you for the comments, feedback and suggestions. Maybe there will be a tweak or two going forward, so these are not the final ones. Please don't take this as read, but I suspect we're pretty close to what they might look like at this point. Event experience. Goal is to ensure they return next year and spread the word. Okay. Okay, right, so Army list rules and restrictions. This is what I'm most interested in. So points level. So there was originally talk of this 1,999 points plus 1. I really didn't like that. For me, it just feels weird. I just don't like it. It's a personal thing, right? They've now gone with a points level of 2,500 points. I thought it would be somewhere between 2,250 or 2,500. I'm really pleased with 2,500 points. I've always felt old Warhammer Fantasy Battle, certainly, once you got into 5th, 6th edition and so on, 2,500 points was a good points value to be at. I think where armies are today in the old world and their points values, this represents a reasonable number of miniatures and variation of potential units without being so huge that it takes too long to play. So, points level, 2,500 points. For me, this is pretty much the sweet spot for this type of game with what we currently have in Warhammer the Old World. So I think this is great. I actually really like they've landed on this position. And then, of course, it's bounded by additional things below. But in terms of a points level, I like it. And I'm pleased that this is where we've got to. So, legacy armies, right? I'm going to repeat that. Legacy armies, ladies and gentlemen, and arcane journals are allowed. So there was a lot of people, obviously, who weren't very happy with Games Workshop, with what they'd said about legacy armies, that they wouldn't be allowed in official Games Workshop tournaments. Well, this is not an official Games Workshop tournament. Legacy armies will be in there, and I think it'll be absolutely great to see Vampire Count, Skaven, and all those other ones, even things like Chaos Dwarves and so on, make an appearance in the Nova Open. Are they going to be the most competitive army out there? Well, look, I mean, how many tournaments have there been? Remains to be seen how the legacy PDFs stand up against the generic army lists. Obviously, there are no arcane journals for these. Is this going to mean that Tomb Kings and Bretonnia are particularly powerful? I'm not convinced that it will, I have to say. Certainly not early on. Power creep tends to happen over a long period of time. So what we see with legacy armies and legendary armies, unless they're absolutely terrible on day 1, which I haven't seen anything in there that says to me that the whole army is absolutely terrible on day 1 for any of the legacy armies. It suggests to me that yes, over time with updates to army books, or the army lists, I should say, and arcane journals over time, that's when we tend to see power creep coming in. So if you look at, take another game system, take Warhammer 40k, where they've moved units to legendary rules. I've certainly found when they first moved to legendary, in a lot of cases, say unless the rules were terrible, then they would actually still be okay and even viable to use in some cases. And it's that over time they become completely obsolete. So certainly here, what we're seeing is legacy armies are in. It's a big deal. I think it's absolutely fantastic for people who love Skaven, love vampire counts, and certainly count myself in that along with the vampire counts. And dark elves. If you want to play it, great that you're able to. And I think at the moment they're not going to be, they're not going to be without any chance of doing well overall. Okay, rule of three, absolutely expected. This is pretty typical across, typical across a lot of game systems, not just Games Workshop ones. And it's basically stopping spam, right? So, having 6, 7 of the same unit because it's technically the best meta choice. So rule of three, I like it, and it's a pretty standard rule, so nothing crazy there. Maximum 2 of the same rare choice. I guess when you're going up in the higher points levels, this is something that can happen because you've got more points to spend, and you're going to start having the option to spam the same unit in the rare category more. When you're down at 2,000 points or so, you'll run out of points pretty quickly in the rare category because stuff there tends to be expensive. I think what this is really doing is limiting some of those more esoteric and potentially deadly war machines as opposed to monsters in particular, or if there's a way to spam monsters through rare, special and ridden heroes. But I think in reality, in terms of points values, this is going to stop you taking some of those more crazy war machines, which tend to be quite cheap, 90, 100, 120 points or so, where you can get a few of those in the rare category at 2,500 points. So no, nothing crazy there. Maximum of 2 characters in a unit. Now, of course, this is going to be on top of the command unit or command models that are in there. Command group, I should say. Command group are just upgraded rank and file. So 2 characters we're talking about is your lords and hero equivalents, wizards, all that sort of stuff in the same unit. So I can see where they're going with this. They're wanting to cut down on Death Star units, though I'm not convinced that a Death Star unit is the way to go. Having one unbeatable unit running around the board generally tends to be not that unbeatable because you lose all your weaker units around it and then either get pummeled or you're completely out of position for the game. But I can see where they're going with it, and let's see how it plays out. I don't have too many thoughts on maximum characters in a unit, but I can see why it's done. Maximum 1 level 3 or level 4 wizard. Okay, I'm not sure about this one. It's not stopping you taking a ton of level 2s, level 1s and 2 wizards, but of course you will be limited about them putting them in units if you've got too many characters. I'm not overly convinced that this is the right way to go, especially given how much magic has been toned down. We're not seeing these enormous, unit destroying spells. A lot of it's buffs or chip damage and that sort of stuff. And a lot of those buffs, you can't stack buffs. So, casting lots of the same spell on someone. A lot of the enchantments or hexes, actually, you can only have one enchantment or hex on a unit because it cancels all the others out. So, and there are some armies which are more important to have magic than others, and it's important for them to get their magic through. So if somebody wants to spend more, let's take the next level down, right? The next point down is a maximum of 35% on characters, right? So they've reduced the number of points on characters by 15%. So you've got a maximum of 875 points. 2 level 4 wizards with relative equipment, you're going through quite a lot of points. How many? You're not going to really be running around with too many blender lords or exceptional melee characters with tooled up with weapons and everything else. So because you're just not going to have the points for it. So I'm not convinced on the maximum of 1 level 3 or level 4. Let me know what you guys think. But when you're thinking about this, try not to think about it just from your army point of view, and try to think about what you think across all the armies out there, because some armies are much more dependent upon magic than others to perform at the same level. And this seems a little too restrictive. But again, it's the first set of tournament rules. There's not been tons of tournaments out there with these type of restrictions in to know how it's going to play out. I will certainly be looking to, once I actually get hold of my models, to try and play a few games using these rules and see how it pans out, particularly, like I say, for those more magic reliant armies. But that's the only one. That's the only one that I sit there going, I'm not sure. Right, the maximum 35% points on characters, yeah, absolutely fine, no problem with that. You can get a lot of characters in at 2,500 points and running it the way. To be honest, having just 50% on characters in the standard rulebook, I still preferred it when it was 25% lords and 25% heroes, and you had this split between lords and heroes. Having been more into the rules and looked at it more and been building some army lists and stuff myself, I actually preferred it that way. So I don't really have any problem with this. So that's okay. Right, maximum 10 models wide for closed and open formations. So this is obviously been done out of necessity for some of the weirdness that we've seen in terms of, 20 wide, more than 20 wide units of dwarf quarrelers and all sorts of other units. And this really comes about due to something that Games Workshop really need to FAQ, which is they need to limit the overlapping models. So just as a reminder for those that are not familiar, is when you're obviously engaged in melee combat, in your fighting rank, if you're wider than your enemy, you're going to have your own models which are not in base-to-base contact with the enemy. They only get to make one attack, but they still get to attack. So even if they're not in base-to-base contact, they get to attack. So if you've got a unit 20 wide and you get hit by another enemy unit that's only 5 wide, you're going to be putting a hell of a lot of attacks back into that unit. Now, I agree that they've had to do something and address this. I would have preferred it to limit the number of models not in base contact. So, for example, a maximum of, say, 2 either side of the, or a maximum of say, 4 models. Let's say a maximum of 4 models not in base-to-base contact can attack back. Because then the ones that are so far out on the flanks they're just never going to get into combat in that turn, right? So that's the way I would have preferred to do it. I think they're only saying it's for closed and open formations, but you can see there are some units where you might want to go wide or wide. It's just having that flexibility, right? As a general, that feels more restrictive because you're physically limiting the number of models wide, as opposed to saying, well, you can have whatever you want wide, but you actually really not going to get the benefit other than 4 models to 4 attacks, which I think is pretty reasonable, right? It's essentially two models either side of the opponent's fighting rank that aren't in base contact. So I would have preferred it that way. but I know why they've done it and why they've had to address it. Again, well, let's see what happens, and let's see what happens if there's any Games Workshop FAQs in the short term, because I do think it is a problem, and I do think it should be addressed. This is one way to do that. I think this is doing the right thing, but potentially in the wrong way, because you're physically limiting the player in their formation, as opposed to the player having to think tactically about their formation and thinking about, well, I only get those extra 4 attacks. How wide do I want to be? How many more extra ranks do I want to have? How deep do I want to be? So on. Anyway, that's enough of that one. Okay, no allies. Yeah, I mean, that's no surprise there. And again, not unusual for game systems that allow this, because it's hard enough to balance. You know, there's always a lot of people, you know, unhappy with balance in all games. Doesn't matter if it's tabletop games, board games, video games, balance, right? It's such a tough thing to do. And of course, the more choice you have out there, and you think, you know, Warhammer the Old World, how many factions are out there, plus your legacy armies. Think of all the various combinations you've got with characters and magic items and everything else. And then let's throw allies on top of that so that you can take something from another army list. So it's very, very hard to get balanced, and it's absolutely open to abusive combinations, which were not intended. And let's face it, that's the point. They were not intended to be like that. So no allies, no problem with that. Right, characters on a chariot and or monster mounts take a slot of that chariot and or monster from the 0 to 3 restriction. Okay. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Detachments use one of the 0 to 3 slots. Okay, so this is all about the rule of 3. Proxies are welcome, but should follow what you see is what you get rule. Yeah, don't put a plastic My Little Toy Pony. So yeah, what you see is what you get within reason, as I've said in previous videos. Your standard bearer can still be equipped with a shield, even though he's not physically carrying a shield. Though there's ways to do that, mitigate that. As I say, you can glue it to his back, glue it to his arm, or something like that. But often you'll see a standard bearer or a musician, the whole unit's equipped with shields. He doesn't have a shield, but it's implied that he does anyway. And that's actually stated in the rules. So you've got to treat it with the way it's meant, right? You know, having a unit of swordsmen and counting them as halberdiers could be very confusing for an opponent. And I suggest you don't do that. Right, okay, so that's the army list and restrictions. So overall, I think this is a pretty good first stab. Let's face it, this is the first Warhammer the Old World tournament run by Nova. I haven't seen any other tournament rule sets come out yet. I'm sure there are out there in different countries and different areas. If you do have any, please send them to me to have a look at. If you've got any tournament results and army lists as well, please let me know and send them to me, and I will love to make some videos looking at what those army lists were and having an analysis of them, and also a look at the rule sets. But from the Nova Open one here, overall, broadly, I quite like it. I'm the only one that I'm really not that a fan of is the maximum of 1 level 3 or 4 at the moment, and I'm not a fan of the maximum 10 models wide, but I appreciate what that one was trying to do. It's the max level 1 or level 3 or 4 wizard that I'm really not sure about. Okay, so how's it going to work? Well, the tournament will consist of 5 games of Warhammer the Old World at 2,500 points, picked from the 15 available armies in Ravening Hordes, Force of Fancy, and the Legacy PDFs. Yeah, I'm going to love saying that one because I think it's great that they're doing it. 3 games will be played on Saturday, 2 on Sunday. Each game will have a time limit of 3 hours in length and 15 minutes setup. 3 hours in length for a 2,500 point game. Now, bearing in mind, most people that are attending tournaments are going to be pretty familiar with the rules, probably played quite a few games leading up to it, so 3 hours should be absolutely easily to do it in that time. And in fact, 2,500 points in a lot of cases will be done by players who are extremely familiar with their armies and their rules. 2 hours, and you'll probably be wrapping it up in that period of time, so that should be no problem. Okay, Right, scoring victory point differential. Okay, so up to +3 bonus points can be achieved in each game via scenario objectives. Okay, we're going to look at this in more detail. I'm not going to go into the points table, that just is as it is. What I'm really interested in, and the score cap, scoring is as it is. Battle, though, max 115 points max, 20 per game, +3 scenario objectives per game. Okay, so it's pretty much maximum on that. Table size 72 by 48. That's a good table size, particularly for 2,500. And then, yeah, you've got all the different things. Hills block line of sight, but everything else pretty standard there. Nothing crazy. Different prizes, which is great. Okay. Right, so let's have a look at the scenarios we've got then. So game 1, break the spirits. Count each army's total unit strength. Once an army has lost more than 75% of its unit strength, the army is broken. Okay, so this is the breakpoint one. The player to break their opponent's army first gets 2 scenario objective points, which is basically 6 additional points. The game does not end when an army is broken. It will continue through 6 turns or when the time expires. The player to break their opponent's army second receives 1 scenario. The player breaks the opponent's fourth and remains unbroken. Okay, that's okay. So that's quite good because you have if it's a really close game, you might get broken, but you might have a chance to break your opponent's army as well and then claw some points back. But if the opponent remains unbroken, he gets all 3 points. So that's quite good. And it's the breakpoint deployment. So yeah, fine, we like that. And that's okay. Like I say, the only thing I had to say about the breakpoint scenario was the tracking of the unit strength all the time. You just got to make sure you're on top of it. Particularly in this situation where you're getting additional points for breaking, and you got to know exactly, if you're trying to bait, throw away units or trade units, you've got to know what you're trading and what's going to cost you in unit strength. So it's really the management of that. Okay. All right, game 2, payment in blood. Okay, this is the meeting engagement angle deployment. Okay, I like angle deployments. They do give a different flavour to the battle. And if you look at 6 inch from the middle there, you're pretty close from the beginning. Can be pretty brutal quite early, this one. You get +1 scenario objective point for killing a monster, killing a caster, and killing the enemy general. Okay. Maximum of 1 point can be scored in each case. Dwarven holds count anvil and runesmiths as casters. Same for warrior priests. And if an opponent's army has no casters or monsters, you automatically receive the scenario objective point at the end of the game. So certainly encouraging you to take some casters and monsters there, at least one. Okay, fairly straightforward, that one. I quite like this, and I do like these scenario objective points. The only thing that I'm concerned about is 3 enough. So you get 1, so if we just remind ourselves, right, so you get 3 scenario objectives per game, and each scenario objective is worth 3 bonus points. So the maximum you can gain winning points. Okay, yeah, maybe in. That will be interesting. It'll be interesting to see if 3 is the right number. Be interested to see if 3 is the right number. Okay. Game 3, Sacred Ground. So mark the centre of the table. No terrain can be within 9 inches of this point at the end of each game after the first player has the most unit strength within 6 inches of the sacred point. Gain +1 scenario objective up to a maximum of +3, and it's the open battle deployment. Okay. See, the only thing with this is where I'd like to have the special feature. The only concern I would have here is you're encouraging people to blob the middle, but there's no feature there to fight around, so it could end up being a bit of just a mass blob. And how enjoyable can that be, and that can favour certain army types a little bit more than others, I think. So I prefer, when having this type of battle, to have a special feature terrain in there that would add something different to it. You could still have the scenario objective for it as opposed to the bonus victory points or something, but an empty middle, but having the empty middle as the only place on the board that you want to be to score additional points could turn to a bit of a blobfest. But again, we'll have to see. We'll have to see. Game 4, Crush Your Enemies. Each table quarter that has a unit strength of 10 or more and has more unit strength than your opponent at the end of the game is worth +1 scenario objective point up to a maximum of 3 points. So this is the Mountain Pass deployment. Okay. So table quarters. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty straightforward one. This is the sort of one I like because it encourages battle in every part of the board. You don't end up just all zooming into the middle. It's a bit more tactical. This is where you could have more interesting things with cavalry. So this is the sort of thing I like, where you go, oh, look, I need to get additional unit strength into a table quarter for the last turn of the game. Oh, I've got fast cavalry. Let's run them over there. That sort of thing. So this one, I really quite like. Really quite like that. Game 5, War is Brutal. So this is the final one. So destroy your opponent's most expensive unit for +1 scenario objective point. So I guess this is, if you're going to have this is where you don't want those Uber Death Star units too much, because they could be really difficult if you've got like so many characters in them. So limiting the characters, it would be really important for that type of rule. So I can see where they've done that. Destroy your opponent's most expensive character. That could be particularly tough for a smart general, though it's always a challenge, right? Because often your most expensive character is the one that you need in combat or close enough to cast certain spells. So you want to use him, but if you get him killed, then to be honest, if your most expensive character gets killed, you could be in a bit of trouble anyway. And then keep your cheapest unit, non-character or war machine, alive at the end of the game for +1 scenario objective point. Okay. That could be interesting. Like a little cheap unit, maybe like 5 dire wolves, or like some a real cheap unit of fast cavalry running around trying to hide in trees and stuff just to survive. Yeah, pretty good. Overall, I think the scenarios are great. I like the scenario objectives. The only one that I'm not sure about is Sacred Ground, only because I say you're forcing people into the battle, but there's nothing there. So you're just forcing a blob with no boundaries around it. Whereas if you had the special feature, you've got to maneuver around it, potentially garrison if it's a garrison one. Potentially you gain benefits for being there or not. But you can't, it could be a feature that blocks a bit of line of sight as well. We're going to have this completely open area in the middle, as far as I can see. Because it says no terrain, it doesn't say anything about putting a special feature in there. So that's the only one which I'm not 100% sold on. Overall, I think this looks like a really great set of tournament rules and scenarios, restrictions and so on. Yes, I've made a few comments about the ones where I'm not convinced that it's the best, but overall I think this is a pretty good starter for 10. As always with these things, they're going to evolve over time. You're going to get feedback. You need to play them. I need to play them. I could be completely wrong about things like the restriction on the wizards. Maybe there should be. I could be completely wrong about this scenario, Sacred Ground. You have to play it. I'm looking at this from paper and previous experience, but I haven't played that scenario as it's written, and I haven't played it with an army list with those restrictions. But overall, I think really good, and a huge props to the Nova Open team for allowing legacy armies. I think that's absolutely fantastic, and I also think it's fundamental to the enjoyment and the reach of the most possible Warhammer the Old World players out there. There's a lot of players, with older armies that do have these legacy armies. That's their favourite army. That's the one they want to use. That's the one they spent the most time painting. They want to get it out. They want to play with it. even if they're not planning on winning with it, I think it's great. So fantastic all around. Great to see the competitive scene starting to pick up. And just remember as well that, as we said at the beginning, these might not be the absolute final rules. There could be some tweaks. Please make sure if you are thinking of going that you do check the rules on a regular basis to keep up to date with them. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it interesting. And there's one thing with tournament rules is that sometimes some of the things that you put in these tournament restrictions can go a long way in casual games to making them more fun. Because sometimes in casual games, you might play somebody who is potentially not someone you know because it's a pickup game, and having some more boundaries can make the game more fun, less win at all cost army style. Even if it wasn't intended that way, the guy just might like, or the girl might just like a bunch of these characters, but it just might make it broken. It's not always done with the intent of malice or winning at all costs, but sometimes it's done because they like it, but it can become broken. So I do like looking at the competitive rules and then thinking about, how would this impact playing a casual game and make it more fun, and potentially make it more fun for those players that casual players that don't have as extensive army lists. So you're trying to tone things down a little bit for players that have huge collections. So even if you're not a competitive player, some of these rules, you take the rule of 3, for example. It's a great rule that I think has validity in casual games as well. So do you have a think about some of those restrictions and go, do you know what, that's actually quite a good idea? Unless you're doing a narrative battle where it's slightly different, but just a casual, balanced match play style points game, some of those restrictions could improve your enjoyment and fun with other players as well. Look, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And let me also know your comments down below on what you think about these tournament rules and what you think about the scenarios. And it'd be great to hear your thoughts as well, because all thoughts and feedback is both helpful to me, to the community, and also to the tournament organisers themselves as well. If you want to see more content though, hit that subscribe button, totally free for you to do. It means a lot for me. So thank you for that in advance, and thank you to all those that have subscribed already. You've been watching The Ghost Owl, and I'll see you all very, very soon as we wrap up the last section of the main Warhammer the Old World rulebook.